Hello and welcome to the MovieKing Podcast. My name is David Jurmann and I'll be your host. On today's show, I'm going to review The Day the Earth Blew Up, a Looney Tunes movie. And in the second half, I'm going to review the film Novocaine. So starting off with The Day the Earth Blew Up, Looney Tunes has been through a lot the last bunch of years. It's pretty crazy. When you think about it, it was really Warner Brothers' signature franchise for a lot of years. Bugs Bunny was quite literally their mascot, and you'd see him like on all the DVDs and all the, opening logos for a while. And this franchise has been around since the 1930s and 1940s, so it's been around for decades and decades and decades. And then the Looney Tunes had some feature films like Space Jam and Back in Action over the years. Not so great, but at least Space Jam has the nostalgia attached to it, so I feel like a lot of people still think about that movie and enjoy watching it as a kid. And then fast forward a little bit, and you have several series come out to keep the franchise alive, such as Baby Looney Tunes, The Looney Tunes Show, and Looney Tunes Cartoons most recently. It seemed like the last regime from Warner Brothers, which was AT&T, wanted to keep the Tunes alive because they made the latter show I mentioned. They made Space Jam 2, and they greenlit a bunch of Looney Tunes feature films that would go to, at the time, HBO Max. And if you've been following the internet, you'd see that the current Warner Brothers regime, which is, Discovery, either scrapped or tried selling a bunch of them off. And as the time of this recording, Warner Brothers took off every episode of Looney Tunes from Max, so you can't even stream it anymore for the time being. Really unfortunate because there are so many good cartoons from a long time ago, and it's really just a good show. I don't know why they would take it off if it's such a valuable IP to them, but clearly Warner Brothers doesn't think it is anymore. As for the movies, you had Coyote v. Acme, a live-action hybrid movie starring John Cena, get written off for tax reasons, I guess. People lost it because after Warner Brothers wrote off an animated Scooby-Doo movie and DC's Batgirl movie, everyone kind of assumed that would be the end of it, which it wasn't because, again, later they just decided, you know what, we're just not going to release this Coyote v. Acme movie, which apparently the people who made it think it's very good, so that's really disappointing. I mean, the reason they kind of scrapped Batgirl was supposedly because they just thought it wasn't up to par with, the quality they wanted from a DC movie. I don't really know about the Scooby-Doo thing. I just think these were both movies meant to be kind of on streaming, and they didn't really want to pay more to put them in theaters. I don't know. Just the Coyote v. Acme one is really frustrating, though, because I really think it could have done well in theaters if they released it. It's very unfortunate they didn't. But going after that, you have The Day the Earth Blew Up, which is what we're talking about here today, a fully 2D animated film starring Daffy Duck and Porky Pig, got sold off to indie distributor Ketchup Entertainment, who bought it off from Warner Brothers. Very thankful for that, because this movie would probably not have been seen otherwise. And unfortunately, due to the small size of the distributor, they couldn't market this movie very much. So practically nobody knew it was even out unless you were actively following things with it. I mean, I've talked to several people and I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to see the new Looney Tunes movie. And they're like, there's a new Looney Tunes movie out? And I'm like, yeah, didn't you know? And they're like, no, I had no idea. So it really just goes to show, unless you went to see Dog Man or Paddington 3 and really stayed during the trailers and watched all of them, you probably wouldn't even know this movie exists. Or maybe if you check Fandango just to be like, oh, what's out today? I'm curious to know what's playing right now, otherwise you wouldn't know it exists. But in any case, this movie is out now and I've seen it twice, and I'm glad to say it's easily the best Looney Tunes movie we've gotten. Not that it's a high bar, but still. I'm not a big fan of Space Jam, either of them, or Back in Action, so to me this is the first truly good Looney Tunes movie we've gotten. And starting off with the positives, it's beautifully animated. We really don't see a lot of 2D animated films anymore. Studio Ghibli still will put one out every once in a while. You get Anime, a lot of those are 2D animated, but Hollywood movies, Hollywood American feature films, really don't get them often. Maybe the Lord of the Rings anime was again kind of that was made in America. You got the Bob's Burgers movie. But really, you can probably count on one hand the amount of, American movies that came out in the last few years that have been 2D animated. And it's really great to see another one. I mean, this movie just has so much fluid animation. The movements are great. You see so much detail in there. It's just a very different experience than watching a CGI animated film. And, I just really enjoy getting to see those once in a while. I also love the dynamic in this movie between Daffy and Porky. It's a lot of fun to see them debate with each other, but also their friendship is at the heart of this movie. I enjoyed the character arcs they had, and it was well done. Their dynamic is different from like some other cartoons you may have seen them in. I mean, I love the Looney Tunes show, which is kind of like a Looney Tunes sitcom of sorts, and I just kind of love the way Daffy and Porky are written in that show. Daffy's like this total jerk who just doesn't care about anyone but himself, and then Porky's just kind of like abused by Daffy, and that's still like kept a little bit here. I mean, Porky's just kind of like caught in the crossfires of Daffy's actions a lot of the time, and I just enjoy that dynamic. And I also just want to say Eric Bauza is a terrific voice actor. The fact that he voices both Daffy and Porky in this movie makes it even more impressive. He manages to sell this friendship where he's playing both parts, and that's seriously cool, and I think very hard to do. I mean, they did it a lot in the original Looney Tunes cartoons, and some other shows have kind of had the same voice actor play multiple roles, but I just think when you're thinking about a feature film, having two of the lead characters played by the same guy is very cool. This movie also has a fun side character, Petunia, who actually has a lot to do, and I'm glad the writers found ways to have each character bring something to the team. Sometimes you just feel like one character doesn't have as much to do as the others. I felt like this movie actually did, do a good job writing these roles and really trying to find ways to utilize each character's different abilities. And the movie is pretty funny, too. There are quite a few jokes that had me laughing out loud and grinning a lot. Some in the beginning, especially like in the first act, that I thought are hilarious. One especially relating to Porky's stutter, and there's a few where like in the montage where they're trying to get a job. I just thought that was really funny. There's just a lot of jokes here that feel very well thought out and just very clever in some ways. And I just enjoyed those quite a bit. The story is also pretty interesting here. It sort of has a sci-fi horror vibe, which isn't something you'd kind of expect for Looney Tunes, but it works well in this context. I mean, we have seen stuff like Marvin the Martian in cartoons, and, they have gotten a little bit sci-fi-ish with, Space Jam, but this is, more sci-fi, I feel like, than even we're used to with Looney Tunes, and that was pretty cool. I enjoyed that. And lastly, I just think it's a very entertaining movie. This is one of those films that doesn't exactly do that much on a story or character level to wow you or anything, but it's a lot of fun. And so long as I'm having a good time watching it, I'm willing to go along for the ride and, kind of bypass some problems. But I do think there are a few problems that do hold this movie back from me kind of significantly. So let me get into that. One is I wish the movie wasn't so obsessed with gum. It's really obsessed with gum. I mean, it's kind of like the way SpongeBob as a show is kind of obsessed with the Krabby Patty. I can kind of understand that a little more because burgers are just a very universal thing, I feel like, especially in America. Everyone eats burgers. Gum, I don't really ever, people eat gum, but I'm not I don't ever see people going out of their way oh, I gotta get some gum at the store right now. That's what this movie goes for. And I think it's a fun concept, but it finds ways to make gum part of the character arcs and the themes and the journey of the movie. But on the other hand, so much of this movie revolves around chewing gum, and I was just sitting there thinking, I really don't know people who love gum this much, and the movie acts like the whole world absolutely loves and lives on gum, and it'll fly off the shelves at Walmart and Target and all these stores, and I'm I just don't think that's how that works at all, but alright. The villain is also pretty fun, and I enjoyed some reveals he had later on in the movie, but I also thought the logistics of his plan were a little too silly, even for a movie with Looney Tunes as the name. And here's the thing, you may totally disagree with me on this or think I sound ridiculous, and that's fine. I'm totally fine with the logistics of Looney Tunes. I'm okay with Daffy's head exploding and then having him be completely fine seconds later. I expect that and can roll with that. But if there's a logical gap in the story or something I consider a plot hole, that bothers me more. Such as why is gum so important in this movie? Why do people love gum this much? And why does the villain do certain things when another obvious alternative is right in front of him and would have made a lot more sense? Your enjoyment will probably vary on if you actually care about that stuff or not, but to me, that was easily the biggest detractor I have with this movie both times I watched it. And the other issue I have is while most jokes are pretty good, some fell pretty flat. And I think most of those jokes were the ones that tried to be a little too modern, a little too hip with the young kids today. I mean, I get it, like Looney Tunes is for, kids can watch it. I mean, Looney Tunes though was always intended actually for adults, which is, I think, really fascinating. Like the old cartoons were made more for adults than kids, although families can watch it and still do love watching it. And I think this movie just goes a little too far into like the kiddie area where it's like there's a few times where I was like, that's not, adults aren't really, that's not for adults, like that's for kids, let's be honest. And that's fine sometimes, but there were a few too many times where I was like, kid trends, like that stuff where I was just like, this movie's not going to age as well as I think even like just classic Looney Tunes cartoons would. Because those are just timeless. A lot of them have, humor that you can literally, like, spans decades and you can still enjoy it. There's mostly enjoyable humor here, but there's a few jokes where I was like, give that 10 years, 20 years, like, no one's gonna get these jokes. No one's gonna know what this is. So that's kind of where I stand on that. But besides that, this is a good movie that is worth seeing, especially if you like Looney Tunes. And I think right now, especially while we, as a giant film community are all trying to convince Warner Brothers to release or sell Coyote v. Acme to someone else, and maybe Ketchup Entertainment will get it, I guess we'll see. People need to support this movie and show that Looney Tunes is still a valued and beloved IP. So if you do like Looney Tunes and you want to see more in the future, even if this movie doesn't like really spark your interest that much, but you want more Looney Tunes in the future, I think you should go see this in theaters, go pay for a ticket, and go support it. If you're not really that interested in Looney Tunes, it's still pretty fun. I mean, go watch it on streaming maybe or something. It's entertaining for sure. And yeah, so I'm going to give this movie a B. It's nothing special to me. I don't really think it's like going to be best of the year or anything like that. But I had a good time. It's definitely an enjoyable film. Alright, and next up is Novocaine. Not to be confused with the 2001 movie Novocaine that I'm sure all of you are aware of and have seen. No, but really. As for this Novocaine, though, it looked like a pretty fun original concept for an action movie. It's about a regular, normal guy who has this disability where he can't feel any pain. And the movie actually addresses this in a lot of interesting ways that I didn't really expect, like how it's both a superpower and a curse. I mean, I'm not really going to spoil anything here, but basically it's kind of like it's a superpower because this guy can just get beaten over and over again, but he's not really, he's just going to keep getting back up because he doesn't understand pain. But it can also be a curse because, this movie kind of addresses this thing where, like, even just normal things us, regular people do all the time. This guy can't really do them because he has to, like, worry, like, oh, am I going to accidentally, like, bite my tongue off or something? And that's just a really interesting nuance, I think, in this, like, disability that really kind of makes it a little bit more interesting than it would have just been if they were just like, oh, it's superpower, like, let him go. It actually shows some, makes him more of a relatable character because you're like, oh, this guy actually does have some weaknesses in this way, and it's just interesting to watch. But beyond that, this movie is about how this guy falls in love and wants to protect and save his new girlfriend when a crazy turn of events occur. And I really like the pitch. The pitch here is great. I think it's just a original concept that we haven't really seen before in this kind of movie, and that's cool. And the execution is decent. I was surprised that my favorite part of this movie isn't even the action. It's actually the rom-com stuff about it. The first 20-30 minutes in this movie are just purely romantic comedy, and I was actually getting invested in the characters and their relationship. That's a really hard thing to do in this kind of movie, and they really just did a good job. Jack Quaid is a very good actor, and he has great chemistry with Amber Midthunder. Both are really good here. Both are, like, just very charming, likable people, and just I bought into their relationship very quickly, wanted to see it develop more. Unfortunately, you don't get to see a lot more of them together after the first act once things really get going, but the action is pretty well done here. Once you have to kind of get past the rom-com and go more into the violent action movie that you kind of paid for, that's what you get. A lot of pretty cool action. It's well shot and choreographed and blocked. Dan Burke and Robert Olson are new directors, but they shot it all confidently, like they knew what they were doing, and I just appreciated that as a viewer. I felt like, they handled it well. It wasn't like too shaky or edited too quickly. It was just done well. And I'd imagine for writers Lars Jacobson, it was probably a lot of fun to think of ways to utilize the main character doing extremely painful things to himself all the time and, not getting hurt by it. And the movie does deliver on that. There are moments where I was cringing a bit, and in a good way, from how bloody and painful things looked. I was like, "Ooh, this how does this guy not feel any of this? That looks terrible." Where the movie did, though, I think lose me a little bit is the story. The characters are endearing, the action is entertaining, but I never really found myself too engaged with the story, to be honest. The villains are just kind of generic and uninteresting. I didn't really feel like they were nearly as good characters as the Jack Quaid or Amber Midthunders of the movie. I just didn't really care for them that much. And whenever this movie would cut away from Jack or Amber, I was kind of waiting for the next action sequence to come so I could just kind of get back to that part of the movie, because I was like, I just don't really care about the story here as much. I don't really care about the villains. Just give me the good action, give me the rom-com, just forget about the rest of it. And that's kind of where this movie's big weakness lies. I think the story, if it was a lot better, this movie just would have been a lot more enjoyable. But it's still, it's still enjoyable, but I just really think it could have been better in that sense. And I think all of this just led to the movie feeling a lot more forgettable than it probably should have been. I think if the side characters were better and the story itself was more well done, I would have liked the movie a lot more. Though I did like Jacob Batalon when he was there. I thought he was pretty entertaining, one of the better side characters for sure. I also just wasn't a fan of one big reveal that I'm not going to spoil, obviously, but I think it actually took away from a lot of the stakes from feeling bigger. When I think of the story and I'm just like, how could the story have been better? I think this one reveal, if you just kind of changed it and actually made it something less surprising, I think the movie actually would have been better for it. So I thought that was a little frustrating, but I do want to say overall, I think this is a pretty fun, if flawed, time at the movies. Don't go into it expecting anything great. Don't expect the next John Wick or anything like that. It's not going to be like the next big action franchise that you've been waiting for. But, look, if you just want to be entertained for a few hours, you want something that just, you can kind of sit back, relax, and just kind of watch some brutal action that will make you cringe, this should do the trick. And, it has some nice humor sprinkled within it. It's pretty entertaining, and I think you'll probably enjoy yourself. I mean, I don't think it's a must, rush out in theaters kind of movie. I think you would enjoy this perfectly fine, on TV. But you know what? Go check it out if you're interested. I don't think it's gonna really be your favorite movie of the year or anything like that, similar to Looney Tunes, but it's just a fun, entertaining film that I had a good time watching. So I'm gonna give this movie a B-. It does have a lot of problems, but I did enjoy it. And that about does it for this episode. If you want to follow my reviews, you can find me on Letterboxd at MovieKing1224. You can also listen to this podcast on your favorite apps such as Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music. If you have any comments or feedback, I would love to hear it and improve the show. And of course, if you've enjoyed this episode, please consider liking, subscribing, and hitting the notification bell to hear more like it. I appreciate you all so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.